Hi, I'm Dr. Selena Fisk, and welcome to this episode of Make Data Talk. In this podcast, I help you turn your spreadsheets into stories in a way that is practical, accessible, and hopefully a whole lot more useful than your grade 9 maths textbook. So the title of today's episode is a little bit provocative, and it's provocative because I get a range of calls and I have a range of conversations about dashboards. And dashboards are visualizations that help us, or I guess a tech solution that help us visualize our data so we can do the data storytelling, but they're absolutely not the answer to all of your data problems. We're going to talk in this episode about why that is and how we get better at thinking about our data. The first point in this episode today, I guess, is just to name it up front that a dashboard is a tool for us to use. It's not a solution. So I often get calls from people who kind of say, look, Selena, we've got heaps of data. We've just paid for this dashboard, or we've developed these maybe visualization solutions in, say, Google Looker or Power BI or in Tableau, and they're not being used all that well. And so people sometimes, I guess, assume that almost those data dashboards are almost like the gold standard or the end game of the data work. But actually, they're a tool that supports us in the use of data. They're definitely not the end product. You can have the most beautiful dashboards in the world. They can be very pretty and have the best visualizations. But if people are not actually logging into it and looking at it, if there isn't a great data culture, so people don't see the value in having the dashboards, they don't understand what they can get out of it. Or if they can't read and interpret it in the first place, then, to be honest, it's a bit of a waste of time. So the change that we're looking for with our data happens in conversations and the doing. Afterwards, it's not just from the visuals. There's also a bit of a common misconception, I guess, that a data dashboard is a data story, and that's not the case. There's a distinction between the two. We can tell data stories using information from a dashboard, but a dashboard is often a collection of multiple visuals. And so there's a whole lot of stories that we could potentially tell just from one dashboard. So they are really different. The second point I would like to talk to is the piece that, if people have got access to all of this information on visualization dashboards without a good understanding of what it is, what it means, and how it can be used, it could actually be used incorrectly, which is problematic. So we can't really assume that because we've got a great dashboard or we've got the tools in place that it's actually being used properly or correctly. Sometimes, I guess, dashboards can give a bit of a false sense of confidence, confidence in the amount of data culture or belief in and use in the organization, but also kind of confidence in the amount that people are using data to inform their practice. We really need to make sure that when we're building capacity in our people. And, I've talked before in other episodes about the fact that our use of data in organizations now is it spans everybody. It's not just the data people. We've got to build capacity of everybody. So we've got to make sure that when we're giving these tools to people that we've actually supported them in the best way possible. And look, you might have rolled out a really great training around the dashboards you've used and that's all really good. But if you've had people leave, you've had new people join, they need to be trained, they need to be shown what the data says, how to use it, what your expectations are for them. And also, dashboards need to change when new data comes in. So if it's not up to date and doesn't have the most recent metrics or, I guess, the most valuable information, then people could kind of be going down a bit of a rabbit hole and making decisions and taking action based on information that is not the most, useful or relevant. I kind of alluded to this one before, but the next point I want to, get to is the fact that data problems are essentially people problems. It's one of the things I often say when I present is, it's about the data, but it's not about the data. This is about humans and it's about the impacts that we have with them, for them, and on them. And we need to collaborate. We need to have conversations with people. We need to connect with them. And that's where the richness of an effective data story comes from. It's not just about the technology. As I said in the first point, technology is the tool that allows us to see some of these trends and insights. But at the end of the day, we actually need to focus on the people that we're aiming to serve by looking at this data. One of the things I often hear people say is, "Oh, I'll go and get them to build a dashboard for that." And it's like, you could. Building a dashboard is going to take time and effort. But actually, if we're not focused on how that dashboard actually helps people in our organizations, then it's completely wasted opportunity. And to be honest on that, I think the worst example was an organization I worked with, and they ended up with, because they kept getting questions from leaders who were saying, "Can we have a dashboard for this? Can we have a dashboard for this?" The worst example I saw was an organization with over 300 custom-built dashboards in their platform. And that's just not sustainable for the people who are building and creating and maintaining those dashboards. And it's a bit chaotic for the user who's trying to find that particular visual that they know what it looks like and what they want to get to, but they don't know which clicks they need to go to and where. So the focus needs to be more on the people rather than the dashboard itself. I guess the next bit that is connected to that is that we need to actually be thinking really deliberately about what questions we have to begin with. So a dashboard is not great in that it doesn't, a custom built dashboard is a bit different. But when we buy a product from a tech provider, the problem I guess we have is that they're trying to anticipate the questions we've got about the data, and then they build a dashboard accordingly. So not every organization is created equal. We're not all the same. We all have different contexts and different people. So actually, we would potentially have different questions that we want to know from the data compared to maybe a similar organization, just down the road from us. So we've got to think about what the question is and what we want to know first before we even start to think about having a dashboard kind of maybe custom built, or even before we look at a dashboard that's already been made for us. The dashboards have got to come after that thinking, not before it. So I've worked with lots of organizations who've gone through the process of, approaching different tech companies and considering what to buy. And I always say to them, you've got to know what you want to know first, and then choosing the tech provider is actually about who's going to help you in the best way possible answer those questions so that you can act on it. As we've said, this is about humans. It's about how we respond to them. And so if the tech platforms are not answering the questions we've got, then ultimately people are the ones that are going to be impacted by that and won't be benefiting from the work that we're doing. And I guess the final piece that I think need to make mention of is that, dashboards, it's almost like this kind of idea of set and forget sometimes. So when dashboards are built and they sit there and, maybe we don't accumulate 300 of them, but if we accumulate quite a few, they can often be ignored and left because the people who are building and maintaining different dashboards, their attention gets pulled in a million different directions. They're being asked to create new dashboards. So, the ones I guess that are not being used all that often kind of fall to the wayside a little bit. And there's a lot of dashboards that I've seen that, to be honest, they could have just stayed as Excel spreadsheets. They don't need to be a dashboard. So that's, I guess a bit of a conversation to have. But, my main guidance around how do we avoid this kind of set and forget, leave the dashboards, I guess not very well maintained and used, is can you think about, if you were to create one dashboard for every group of users in your organization, so whether that's like a team leader, an executive, an employee in a particular team, what questions would they have of the data and what's the best dashboard for them? And, my main recommendation is if we can just direct people to the best one, like single dashboard for them, that then allows them to go off into different rabbit holes and look at different data if they want. But we're trying to simplify the use of data as much as possible. So we want to put in front of people the best information for them that helps answer the most relevant questions, but do that in like a one-stop shop. And look, that's easier said than done. I'm very well aware of that. But if our guidance to the people we work with is, look, I just want you to go here first. Every time you get onto the dashboard, you're going to this particular page. We're really kind of, I guess, helping that decision making. We're supporting our employees. We're being clear about what we want and expect. And ideally, if we've done the thinking about what their questions are going to be, it's actually going to be showing them the data that's most relevant. So, as I said, data dashboards aren't the answer to all of your data problems. So not sorry for being provocative, but I hope that this episode has kind of shown you how and why that's the case. Firstly, we talked about the fact that it's a tool, it's not a solution. We need to make sure that when we're showing all this data and having it visible, that people actually know how to interpret it. Because our third point was that data problems are generally people problems. So it's about the data, but it's not about the data. We want to be guided, first of all, by the questions we have of the information we're collecting, and then that should be used to create the dashboard. Because otherwise, the final point was we end up with a whole lot of dashboards that just sit there and, they probably could end up as museum pieces one day. So thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Make Data Talk. As always, if you found this useful, I'd really appreciate you sharing it with other people, data, algorithms, podcasts, platforms, all of that. It actually really does matter. There's lots of podcasts out there. And so anything you can do to kind of support this podcast is very, very much appreciated. As always, look after yourself and take care.